you so much. So this is our last part of our 4-part series, and thank you for joining us. If you're new today, thank you. If you've been here the whole time, thank you, thank you. So we just wanted to start again, just let you know that everything here is in the Padlet. And then Amy went ahead and uploaded some more resources that she talked about from the Teach Me session. She uploaded those for you in the resources column yesterday. And I know this is all available in the Google Classroom as well.
So just as a quick review, this presentation is based on a book that we recently published. With this book, we really saw an opportunity to support educators in better meeting the needs of underserved, high potential learners by sharing resources and research that we had found to be effective through our years in the K-12 classrooms, and then working with our graduate students now who have come back to get master's degrees or endorsements in gifted education. So based on just our different experiences, we were able to pull together some resources that we were excited to share. We always like to say that we are still learning and growing in this area too. And also want to say we know that many of you are already doing wonderful things in your classroom with some of these learners. So we want to recognize that, acknowledge it up front as we go into this final presentation. And as Jenny said, we just really appreciate everyone spending this time with us. When we're talking about underserved high potential learners, we are talking about the list of students we have there on the right, students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, English language learners, economically disadvantaged students, students from under-resourced rural areas, and then twice exceptional students. We also want to point out that we often use high potential and gifted underserved learners interchangeably. We are referring to many different types of learner in your classroom when we use those words. So we're talking about students who are already identified for gifted education programs. We're talking about students who have been identified for services in talent pool. We're talking about students who have not yet been identified but will be at some point. And then we also know that there are students that meet many of these characteristic and behavior criteria that we talk about that you may never formally identify for gifted programming, and yet they still need these considerations in the classroom. Our first two sessions were See Me and Understand Me. Yesterday we did Teach Me, and then today we finish up with Challenge Me and just a little bit of Advocate for Me. The quote that we started this session with is by Jaime Escalante. We are all concerned about the future of education, but as I tell my students, you do not need to enter the future, you create the future. The future is created through hard work. So just another general quote that we really like and wanted to share with you. This is our student quote that we are sharing for today. This student wanted all of her teachers to know, I like to be challenged and will always try as hard as the teacher who is teaching me. We think that's true about so many of our gifted learners. The acronym that we put together, is this me, Jeannie? The acronym that we put together for this chapter is ASPIRE. So we have ASPIRE strategies that we're going to talk about throughout this session. As educators, we should aspire to positively impact our underserved gifted learners' lives, help them realize and cultivate their potential, and make sure they know we are fully committed to their success. Our students, in turn, should aspire to reach the academic and personal heights they are capable of reaching. So that frames what we're doing. The A in ASPIRE stands for Add Challenge Thoughtfully. S is for supply the support necessary for success. Provide opportunities for mentorship. Identify possibilities for independent investigations. Recognize when acceleration is vital. And then embed curriculum compacting into learning units. First one is add challenge thoughtfully. Adding challenge thoughtfully requires that you carefully assess which of your underserved gifted learners are prepared for additional challenge when provided with the appropriate levels of support. Anyone who has ever taken an educational psychology course, I'm sure that you're familiar with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. This is basically that functioning between what's too easy to really challenge and engage your underserved gifted learners and what is so hard that it causes them to shut down in some way, so to give up or to not even try in the first place. We found that it's fairly common for educators to understand and try to address this zone of proximal development need for what we might call, I guess, the average learner, if there is such a thing as an average learner. This often happens actually by teachers putting students into small groups where the on-level students have the opportunity to work with a peer or someone who's more knowledgeable or adept at whatever they're doing, and then can support that on grade level learner and help provide the additional challenge and support that they need. The grouping is a philosophical question that we won't get into too much, but it's important to consider if high potential, if high achieving students are always the ones that are providing the zone of proximal development support to other students, when do they ever have the opportunity to work within their zone of proximal development? So that's something that we really need to consider. This is not really taken into account very often, we found, with gifted learners. We're not really focused on how do we put them in situations so that they're able to work with someone slightly above where they would be able to function on their own, to be able to work in that zone of proximal development, which we know is where they are able to work at their highest capacity. Even less frequently, I think, our underserved gifted learners, those high potential gifted learners from underserved populations, many times we don't even recognize that this is a possibility for them because their strengths are not what we typically look for in an educational setting. So we feel really, really strongly that it's so important to get to know those underserved gifted learners in your classroom so that you can determine which ones really need that challenge and then can decide how to provide it thoughtfully to them in a situation where they can be successful with it. And one more thing, we know that the zone of proximal development, that phase of learning is very motivating to students, and that's really where we want them to be. We want them to be motivated to engage and learn in the classroom. So determining learner readiness, part of adding challenge thoughtfully is determining initially which of your underserved gifted learners are ready for a challenge of some sort. I think it's really important to recognize that there's a fine line between believing in your students' potential to be successful with challenge and communicating that belief to them, that you know that they can be successful, and then pushing them too quickly or too far and jeopardizing that trusting relationship that you do have with them. That relationship can be damaged by setting them up for a challenge and then not providing the support that they have to have in order to be successful. And unfortunately, that impact, the effects of this potentially stretch beyond that single assignment or even beyond the whole time in your classroom. And they carry that with them, that fear that they won't be successful in another challenging situation in the future. It also has the potential of impacting others' view of them and what they're capable of doing. So we need to be really, really cautious of providing that support once we determine that they're ready for challenge in order to build their self-efficacy and self-concept. We know, so we're going to ask you to look for particular things in the classroom as we're ready to offer challenge to our learners. We know from current research that when only teacher nominations are provided in order to identify students who might need additional challenge or that might need to go through the identification process for gifted education, that we don't typically do a good job of recognizing those students who are underrepresented gifted learners. Because of that, we need to be very, very tuned in to their unique strengths and what each individual learner in our classroom is capable of doing, what they're exhibiting to us. Looking at the list that we have, some indicators that these students, these underrepresented gifted learners in your classroom might be ready for challenge is if they're passively engaged in learning or completely disengaged. If you find students that learn new material quickly and with minimal effort, so it doesn't mean that they're coming into the classroom already knowing everything that you're going to teach, but they're picking it up quickly. If they are willing to delve deeper into class topics, they're posing challenging questions or making connections that demonstrate higher level thinking. If they're demonstrating curiosity beyond the classroom requirements, so they're doing their own research, they're taking it home, they're coming back and they're talking about what they found. If they're showing persistence and they're focused on learning mastery and growth, so not just about a grade, they really are interested in the topic and want to grow and learn. And then if they are receptive to constructive feedback and open to receiving additional support, this is also a really key factor in identifying those students that we can offer challenge to. It's also super important that this be done collaboratively, that you have a conversation with those students that you've identified. Share with them the strengths that you are seeing in them and why you think that it might be a good idea for them to take on some additional challenge. And then work with them to figure out what a safe challenge would be for them and what type of support they're going to need from you in order to be successful. And this collaboration in planning is very validating to them, and it's another way to build their self-efficacy. Supplying the support necessary for success. I know we've touched on this multiple times. Challenging underserved high potential learners often requires not only support strategies like scaffolding and front loading, but also more targeted support. Sometimes you have to get very, very specific. Sometimes they might need, I don't know how prevalent AVID is where you are, that program, but sometimes they're actually in-depth programs that they need in order to provide the supports that they have to have in order to be successful. So sometimes it's to backfill those skills that they need. This is due to potential gaps in learning and gaps in opportunities that they've had in the past to cultivate the skills that they need in order to be successful, to persevere with these. I also want to make a note, as you are identifying students in your classroom that need this challenge, also be open to those students who self-identify. We talk a lot about challenge by choice, and those students who are self-identifying, I want to try this, I want to do this, I see that they're doing this particular activity, I really want to do this. There is a really good chance that they will be successful because of their level of motivation. That level of motivation overcomes a lot when it comes to students being successful with different activities and being able to show you what their strengths are.
So these are just some academic challenge support tips that we wanted to share with you. So providing ongoing encouragement. So when your students face new academic challenges, take on the role of their coach and cheerleader. Remind them why you believe they're capable of handling this new challenge. And the why is really important for students. So specific feedback, you have the background knowledge. I've watched you persevere before. I know you have, or you're capable of developing the skills to do this. We talked in previous sessions about cultivating like student scholar identity or intellectual identity. So during a challenge, we might ask questions like, what are you learning about yourself as a scholar? What are you realizing about the way you learn best and solve problems, building in some of that metacognition? How will you apply what you've learned about yourself to future challenges in this class, other classes, and outside of school, helping them make connections that what they're doing, this challenge, this isn't just reserved for your class, but they can apply these skills to other places. Maintaining a collaborative attitude, like Amy mentioned. Remember, collaboration is not evaluation, and sometimes I think we evaluate with the best of intentions, but during a challenge, we need to be careful about avoiding critiquing what students are doing or kind of swooping in and doing it for them. We need to be their collaborator, their facilitator. Instead of, I'm sure you've heard the sage on the stage or the guide on the side. We want to be the guide on the side, and their collaborator in the learning process. And we want to try using open-ended, non-leading questioning to facilitate problem solving. We want to make sure when we're doing the open-ended questioning that we're still not leading them in the way that we think the problem should be solved. We want to keep very, very open-ended questions. So fostering healthy communication is such an important skill that we want to help our students learn. So it's important for students to know that they can ask for support during a challenging learning task, that they're going to be able to get that support. So make sure you're always looking for signs of frustration, and encouraging communication in a safe, proactive way. So instead of saying, you seem frustrated, which may get them on the defensive, we might say instead, talk me through this, talk me through, what you've been working on, or has anything been going well? So talk me through maybe what's been going well. So this is, I actually did this for a different research study, but this is just an emotional literacy chart, and I kept it as a Word document in the Padlet so you can modify it and make it appropriate for the grade level that you're working with. But this I've used, so during this lesson, and students can just keep this on their desk. It can be laminated. They can have it in their agenda, they can have it someplace, and it's for you to be able to do kind of a quick check-in with what's going on. So during this lesson, like a 4, I feel frustrated, overwhelmed, or angry, and they can add their own. What I'm learning is difficult, I need extra support. So this way too, they don't, feel like they're putting themselves out there, they're being vulnerable. They can kind of just circle that, and you can walk around and do a check, and then, they're indicating it in a safe way. A 3 would be, I'm challenged, I'm interested, I'm staying positive. What I'm learning takes extra effort, but I can handle it. A 2, I'm confident, I'm sure of myself. What I'm learning is just right for me. And then a 1 is, I'm a little bored, annoyed, distracted. Again, you can modify, change these words, you can change the emojis. What I'm learning is too easy for me. And then that indicates to us, okay, well, let's talk to them, let's have a discussion, let's see if we can give them more challenge. So emotional literacy, I think, needs to start at a young age and can be used all the way through the secondary level. We need to promote perseverance. So sometimes you may need to take back seat while students work through a difficult task, and that can be really, really hard. Watching students struggle a little bit with something difficult. But this doesn't mean abandoning our students. So I've mentioned before, especially when I work with parents, like the 3 times rule. So, why don't you incorporate some type of 3 times rule when there's challenge? So did you try this 3 different ways? So what are 3 different ways that you could approach solving this problem, and did you use 3 different ways before you just kind of shut down, put up the iron curtain, and said, I'm done with this? So engage students in a conversation about why they're stuck, and sometimes through them kind of processing why they're stuck with a particular problem, they actually can get themselves unstuck from the problem. So sometimes it's just having that dialogue, having that conversation out loud, that helps them to process what's going on. And then to, of course, really, celebrate, when they're able to get themselves unstuck, and to really build kind of that self-efficacy, that they're able to do it, so that, next time they remember that, and they know that they're capable of getting themselves unstuck through a difficult problem, but also they also know that you're there to support them. So we have resources for mentorships that we developed within the book, but this again could be a series of presentations. So we just wanted to mention this briefly. So tapping into existing resources, we know that mentorships for our students can be life-changing. They can show students a future that they, that actually becomes, within grasp for them, they get excited about. Um, so tapping into existing resources, local high schools or college students might enjoy sharing and cultivating interests with younger students. We worked with a teacher who wanted to start a robotics club for her students, but it was a very under-resourced school, and she just, wasn't sure how to get the funding, how to even get started. But the kids showed interest in it, and she wanted to do this for them. So reached out to a local high school and partnered with them, and the high school actually donated, resources to the kids to start like a Lego robotics club. Came down, showed the kids, how to use the software, actually worked with the teacher, to get this off the ground. So that would be an example of a one way to really get mentorship started. Pairing mentors based on student interest. So talking with your friends and colleagues to find experts in your community who would be willing to share their expertise with students. We will say being selective about mentors is important. So they often need as much training and support as your student. And within the book, and if you want extra resources on this, please just email us. Our email addresses will be at the end of this, and we're happy to send you the forms for the mentorship activities. One is to gauge kind of students' interests, what they would feel comfortable, what kind of mentor they would like. Others are just a mentor evaluation rubric. So we do have more information about this if you're interested in it. Yesterday, we talked to you about independent investigations, which we just really love, and we love them for several reasons. So they validate our students' strengths and interests. They build self-efficacy with the appropriate support, always with the appropriate support. They provide the opportunity to develop and enhance students' skills, cognitive, academic, social emotional skills. They allow students to practice skills necessary for future success, to actually apply real world skills. You will need to scaffold as necessary. So sometimes I think, we start a project, or, if a student were to do a project, on their own because we want to give them this extra challenge, we still need to facilitate, we still need to set kind of goals around that project. We still need to help them with the timeline, have checkpoints. So we're very much still a part of the process as the teacher. And if we can involve families in it, that's even better, to get them excited as well and to be able to support their student. So too much freedom, we mentioned this yesterday, can be just as paralyzing for high potential students as too little. We need to know our students. So we're going to share with you, I'm going to share with you an actual real world example from one of my students. And then after, we're going to give you 2 forms. And we know that many of you work with the school-wide enrichment model. So we're just going to give you a couple of extra resources to use in planning and evaluating independent investigations with your students. Amy, did you want to say anything about that? Else about that?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So here is one of my students, my former students. He's not that is a pseudonym, but Chris was a 7th grader who was identified gifted in reading, but also received accommodations for a writing disability. Miss Russell learned from Chris's parents that he didn't want to be in her advanced language arts class anymore because he thought he wasn't smart enough and was slowing down the class. Miss Russell wanted to help Chris see his strengths so he would understand he did belong in the class. With Chris's input, she provided him with the opportunity to conduct an independent investigation on a topic of his choice. I will say with this particular student, one of my earliest memories of knowing that this student would need extra support and really needed confidence building, we did Latin stems, Latin root words, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And the students had to make flashcards, and this was something that the 6th grade gifted, 7th grade gifted ELA, 8th grade gifted ELA, they would just make a series of flashcards. And his mother contacted me and just said, every year he just is crying making these flashcards because he's having to correct his writing. The reading through the STEMS book it just takes him a lot of extra time. And so with him, one of the accommodations that we actually worked on, he loved to draw, he's an artist. So he actually, instead of doing the flashcards like everybody else did, he drew his interpretation of the definition of the word and then explained it to me. So just so you have a little bit more background just of this student. And this is, again, just knowing your students. So Chris was fascinated by Rube Goldberg machines. For his independent investigation with guidance from Miss Russell, so I'm actually Miss Russell. Chris first researched Rube Goldberg machines. Since he loved to draw, next he designed and created a blueprint for a Rube Goldberg machine based on his research. For the third part of his investigation, Chris not only built the machine, but also recorded the process on video and narrated the creative problem-solving steps he took to make the machine function as intended. For the final part of his investigation, Chris asked for the opportunity to teach the class about Rube Goldberg, show his own video, and bring the machine to demonstrate how it worked. So at Chris's demonstration, his 30 classmates watched as he dropped a marble and it traveled down plastic tubing and knocked down dominoes and various other objects. The students gasped and clapped when finally a sign rose to the top of the machine. It read, "Do I get an A?" Chris beamed with pride that afternoon and for the rest of the school year. He never again questioned whether he belonged in an advanced language arts class. And so that is actually him, and this is his machine. And the ball would go through here, knock down everything, and then there was a lever, and the hand raised, and it said, "Do I get an A?" And the principal came, just different teachers from the school and everybody to see this. And that was such a validating and exciting thing for him. And that was done through an independent investigation. And taught him, I will say, lots of research skills, different things in the process. So this is one way to plan and think about an independent investigation. So with the student, there's different steps. So we want to explore topics that interest you. So what are your passion areas? What are you excited to spend several weeks learning more about? And we start brainstorming ideas. We learn more about one topic that really interests you. So we can read, listen to, and watch informative materials on a topic. We want to make sure we're using credible sources such as reference books, professional organization websites, TED Talks, etc. So how can we learn more about the topic that interests you? We need to generate problems, questions or problems. This is when we mentioned yesterday, if we can use higher level questioning to kind of frame questions that we want to answer. So avoiding thin questions or problems that can be answered or solved relatively quickly. We create an investigation plan to answer questions or solve problems. Maybe this is where you can introduce more quantitative methods, like actually doing survey type data, or more qualitative methods, such as telling a story with words. Or will you use both? What's your timeline for completion? So again, steps. Select an authentic audience. Who do you want to show this to? Who's going to benefit the most from seeing this? Execute the investigation plan. What steps are you going to take to carry out the investigation plan? Analyzing and interpreting our data. How will you make sense of the information that you collected? Asking, so what? What information do you hope to be able to share with your audience through this independent investigation? And then getting to the end, we're preparing for something, some type of presentation, final product. Amy mentioned yesterday, and I believe posted some rubrics of, just ways to kind of come up with the criteria for different authentic products, and students can certainly take ownership of coming up with their own rubrics. But how will you make your presentation or product interactive? How will you ensure it conveys the full scope of your independent investigation? Think outside the box. Try something other than a slide presentation or a poster. And then that reflection piece becomes really, really important. How will you consider what you have learned, not only about your interest area, but about yourself as a scholar, right? There's such pride in getting to the end of this process and realizing, you have the ownership, autonomy of this process. What did you learn about yourself as a scholar? How will you apply what you learned? Again, connections, from your independent investigation to future experiences, both in school and outside of school. So not necessarily what you learned about the topic, which it can be, but also about yourself as a scholar, the skills that you developed, how can you apply those elsewhere? And then this is just a self-evaluation rubric. So I did a good job exploring and narrowing down topics that interest me. I need to improve, and this is just helping with reflection. So reflect on that and talk this through, with the student. And you don't necessarily need to do this at the end. You can chunk this and do this in parts. Learning more about one topic. I did a good job learning more about one topic that really interests me. I need to improve in this area. Why? I did a good job generating questions or problems. This is where I need to improve. Okay, let's talk about why. And then, if you're doing this early instead of at the end, now this is an opportunity to go back to those questions and refine those questions. Same with creating an investigation plan, selecting an authentic audience, analyzing, interpreting data, reflecting, etc. This is you, Amy.
Okay. So we want to take a break, like we have in every session, give you the opportunity to process a little bit the information that we've just given you, but also give you the opportunity to share things that you're doing, thoughts that you have for moving forward. So for this particular breakout activity, you're going to have 15 minutes. We're going to ask you to think about the sections that we've talked about. So adding challenge thoughtfully, supplying the support necessary for success, providing opportunities for mentorships, and identifying possibilities for independent investigations. And then we really want you to think about which of these in your particular setting seem most relevant to your underrepresented high potential learners. Which of these are most realistic to implement in your educational setting? Part of processing that is figuring out what the potential barriers are and what are the creative ways that you could problem solve these barriers. And we always encourage the teachers that we work with to really focus on what's within your sphere of control when you get to this part. It's really easy to figure out what's wrong in the world that is keeping you from meeting some of the needs of your underrepresented gifted learners, but within your sphere of control. What's most relevant, what's realistic, potential barriers, and possibilities that you might try to problem solve and get past those barriers. So here, when you go in and out of the room like they do on, okay, so couple things that were posted before we broke for our discussion. So Avid, you are familiar with Avid, so that's good. That's a really great resource for many of our underrepresented section, which is recognizing when acceleration is vital. So the purpose of academic acceleration is to challenge students appropriately by moving them through academic material or the academic system faster than what we would expect other students of the same age or grade to be able to do. With the very best of intentions, there are still teachers and administrators who really push back against acceleration for gifted learners or high potential learners, high ability learners. They're afraid that in some way this is going to be detrimental to the child. This is often even more true of our underrepresented gifted learners, either because they honestly don't see those strengths as being something that they need to support through acceleration, or they're just really protective of that student and they don't want to put them in a situation where they might fail. So I do, just with working with teachers for so many years and administrators, believe that most of the time when there's pushback, it's because they really believe that they are doing what's best for the students that they're working with. However, academic acceleration is the most researched intervention in gifted education with very positive results. There's evidence of improved self-esteem for students that are academically accelerated, positive post-high school outcomes. We know that acceleration can be used to meet the need for challenge of our underserved gifted learners. And what's great about acceleration is that it's typically either no cost or very low cost to implement. Additionally, most types of academic acceleration, if they're implemented thoughtfully with input from the child and all of the stakeholders, it's a low risk intervention. However, it's very, very important with any type of acceleration to make sure that you have academic and affective support in place for them. Some of them will need it more than other, but it needs to be available when you're considering any type of academic acceleration. The last point that we want to make, some of you may be very familiar with these resources already, but there is a lot of guidance. There is so much in-depth guidance to help you make decisions about whether or not you want to work to accelerate one of your students and how to do that. So we will post in the resources section in the Padlet. There's a Nation Deceived, fabulous report that came out initially. After that, we had a Nation Empowered. Again, if you haven't seen these, so much good information, so much research, so much rationale for why this is an appropriate strategy. And then Bellenblanc Center actually has the Acceleration Institute, and there are many resources on there that are super helpful for anyone that's looking at acceleration as a strategy for your gifted learners, your underserved gifted learners. So we will make sure that we get that posted so that you have access to it. There are actually at least 20 different types of acceleration. We have pulled out just a few that tend to be more straightforward and are typically the least expensive to implement if you're going to take this on in a classroom, in a school. So the ones that we pulled are early entrance to school. So starting kindergarten early, starting first grade early, grade skipping, this would be whole grade acceleration, subject matter acceleration, curriculum compacting is a type of acceleration, advanced placement, international baccalaureate are both examples, and then dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment are the types that we pulled out as good examples of what you might be able to implement for and with your learners. Oh, and early entrance to college. Did I miss that one? Okay, early entrance to college is another one that is very effective with our underserved gifted learners with that support. Within the different strategies, they're basically divided into two different categories. We have the content-based acceleration, and then we have grade-based acceleration. So again, it's really, really about getting to know your underserved gifted learners to determine which is most appropriate, which provides the challenge that they need and still puts them in a position to be successful. So with content-based, we are providing students advanced content, skills, and understanding before and beyond what would be expected at that age or grade. So examples of this would be early entrance to kindergarten. I don't know how prevalent that is there. That's a big push in Colorado to make that available in the different districts. There's single subject acceleration, curriculum compacting, and then independent investigation. So those would all be considered acceleration in a content area. The other primary category is grade-based acceleration. Obviously, this needs to be undertaken with more thought. This is a little higher risk, although there are still really good outcomes for students when it's done thoughtfully with all the stakeholders involved. Grade-based acceleration shortens the number of years that a student is in that K-12 system. So here we're actually talking about skipping whole grade levels. We're talking about accelerating in a multi-grade classroom through potentially two years of school. We're talking about early admission to college. ABIP, concurrent dual enrollment. Just like with gifted education in general, our underserved gifted learners often have less opportunity to participate in this type of accelerated programming. We know from the research that this just doesn't happen regularly. Factors for this include that for many of these students that the academic skills are still developing, and so teachers are hesitant to put them in a situation where those skills are not yet fully developed. These students have a lack, or they lack, and relevant is important here, they lack relevant enrichment or extension beyond the classroom. That doesn't mean that they're not having very enriching experiences in their home or in their communities, those experiences just don't necessarily lend themselves directly to academic success initially. And so they don't have that background, they don't have that foundation. Another aspect is that just like we talked about earlier, if they've been set up for a challenge or taken on a challenge in the past and have not, for whatever reason, been successful with it, that self-concept, that self-efficacy is impacted, they may not be willing, they may not have that confidence to take on a similar challenge in the future. So those past experiences, whether or not they've been successful, impact whether they participate in these programs. And then we've also talked about implicit bias, not that teachers are choosing to try and exclude them necessarily from programming, but just for whatever reason, they are not being recommended, they're not being supported in participating in this type of program because they don't see them as possibly being successful. Your underserved gifted learners, those that have the potential and desire to participate in this type of programming, it's so important to encourage them and to provide the supports that they need to be successful. And it's all of the things that we've been talking about, the scaffolding, the front loading, mini lessons that they need either ahead of time or as it arises in a situation, extra support through study sessions. And then one thing that's really important when putting students in this position, in a position to take one of these classes that maybe they wouldn't typically have taken, is that teachers have the training and support that they need to understand how to teach and support these students as well. I see a bunch of comments popping up. I'm anxious to click over and read those in a minute. So we actually had a study that came out in this area. We were really interested in underserved gifted learners in AP classes. Our study was called An Exploration of Factors that Predict Advanced Placement Success for Gifted Hispanic Students. A note here, the use of Hispanic, Jenny and I, we spend so much time trying to figure out what is the appropriate term to use for different groups of students. And it's really hard to know when you aren't able to ask them directly how they would like to be referred to. So with this particular study, we used Hispanic because that is what the district used. It was their demographic information. So they self-selected into different categories, and Hispanic was one of them. So we were looking at gifted Hispanic students that were participating in advanced placement. The school that we were working with was culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse. It was a high school, and yet when they looked at who was participating in their honors and their AP classes, that diversity was not represented in the advanced level courses. And it was really important to them to figure out some way to fix that to the best of their abilities. So they were able to secure a 3-year grant, and the focus of that grant was to increase participation in honors and AP courses by creating a culture within the school where all students were expected to participate in rigorous coursework and were expected to be successful with that coursework. This involved targeted recruiting of students from underrepresented populations. So teachers going in and explaining to them exactly what this was all about, why it would be a good idea, what types of support they would have, meeting with parents, explaining what was happening. So making sure that they had all of the information and knew that they were welcome to participate. Prior to this, students that participated in advanced placement at this high school, not only did they have to meet a certain GPA, they also had to have teacher recommendations. So teachers saying, yes, this student would be a good fit for advanced placement. In addition, they had to complete summer homework on their own the summer before that academic year started. So when they came in August, in order to participate, they needed to have already done some pre-work in the content area. So teacher recommendations, GPA, summer homework were completely eliminated for this high school. They also collaborated closely with AVID and the gifted education specialist in the school to provide very targeted support to underrepresented gifted learners that were going to participate in these honors and AP courses. They were able to offer regular weekend and after school study sessions where they provided food for all of the students. One thing that the research has found regarding participation in AP, well, a lot of the schools increase their participation of underrepresented gifted learners in these courses. Many of them are either discouraged or not encouraged to take the AP exam at the end of the year because it potentially negatively impacts the school's average. And so this was something that the high school decided. Their expectation was that every single student that took the class would participate in the AP exam. So they knew that going in, that this was part of what happens with AP classes in this school. Because of the grant, they the funding helped provide support for some of these things. So they provided food for the study sessions. They provided some training for teachers, like we talked about earlier. This is how you support students. This is what needs to happen. Typically, AP courses are not differentiated. Teachers think that if they are taking AP, then they need to just be able to jump in and learn. So a lot of time with teachers on understanding and learning how to differentiate and scaffold for students. So there was some funding for that, some funding for updated materials. There was funding to subsidize exams. So for students from low-income households, all of the exams were subsidized. For all of the other students, the primary content areas, so English, language arts, social studies, science, I believe, they were able to pay half of the amount for those fees. And then there were stipends for both teachers and students who passed the exam. So the following year, when scores came back, then teachers and students both received stipends if they passed. So yes, there was a lot of support for this. There was motivation for students to participate. There was motivation for teachers to participate. But the results of this, regardless of that, we just thought were really interesting, really important to share. And that's where this article came from. What we found was participation of underrepresented populations increased significantly across the board at this high school. So Latinx students who spoke Spanish as a home language as opposed to English, and then students from that participated were eligible for free and reduced meals. The numbers jumped significantly through this recruiting and through this support. Gifted Latinx students and gifted students from Spanish-speaking homes, based on the data and the analyses, they were just as likely to pass AP exams as gifted white students. This went against every bit of research that was out there prior to this. So this just flew in the face of everything that we believed to be true at this point about these learners. Gifted Latinx students passed at a higher rate than gifted white male students in this particular study. And there was a cultural shift in the entire building regarding the perceptions and expectations for these students and what they were capable of doing. So this is a quote that was pulled from, and I don't think I even talked about this part. The Fordham Institute picked up this research after we published it, and they put out a commentary on it, shared it, put out a commentary on it. And one of their statements was that Grafey and Richot's study reminds us once again of the importance of strategic investments in underrepresented students. This study and many others find that talented students of color are just as capable as more advantaged peers. All they require is access to the right resources and quality teachers. And this just really summed up why we thought it was so important after we dug into the information to get that out. And I will tell you honestly, when we started running the data and looking at it, these results were not what we were expecting. We were shocked, and we actually went back and we ran it again because we thought, and there's that implicit bias, we thought somewhere we'd messed something up. But so happily we were wrong. And so we wanted to make sure that this was out there for people to see and know about.
And I will say the Fordham Institute article, we put it in the resources in Padlet, and Amy is going to post our research as well.
So then the last section that we're going to talk about right now is embedding curriculum compacting into learning units. When we're talking about embedding curriculum compacting, we're usually centered on a single unit of instruction where we're working to eliminate material or work that students have already mastered. It's a really easy, low-cost way to appropriately challenge underserved gifted learners. It gives them a great opportunity to demonstrate domain-specific strengths, and it could just be short periods of time. So it may just be that they really have a strength in this one area. We recognize it, we validate it, we're able to compact them out of it and give them an opportunity to learn and grow in a different area. And this type of curriculum compacting encourages continuous growth and mastery, growth and progress for all students who have that mastery. Very basic implementation steps here. It's important always when you're going to do something like this to pre-test the skills and concepts ahead of time. So you have to know what it is they need to be able to master. It's also super important that you are not looking for 100% mastery. At 80% mastery, they know enough about what you are getting ready to do that it will basically be a waste of their time to sit through in-depth instruction at this point. So once you've determined that, next step is to create a contract that shows what they've mastered and what they still need to learn, and then share that with them. And again, I have some we have additional resources. If you would like to see some of this, we're glad to share it, but just wanted to make sure that we did put this out there as good practice for underserved gifted learners as well. Once you know what they've mastered, once you know what they still need to learn, during your teaching of what they have mastered already, you're going to give them alternatives to do something different. So something independently or in a small group away from that whole class instruction. Now they can come back to that whole class instruction anytime they want. And there's a bigger discussion about do they, at the end, are they still responsible for taking that final test? You know, do they still need to prove to you again that they do have that mastery, even though they pre-tested at 80%? That's a philosophical discussion, but because of that, and just because some of your students want to be involved, they shouldn't be excluded from participating in whole class instruction if they've mastered it, but during that time, they have the option to really pursue something that is of interest to them. Again, another philosophical discussion is whether or not that needs to be in the same content area. If you're compacting them out of math, does that extra time need to be focused in math? Or have they, since they've demonstrated mastery, do they have that time to pursue an individual interest or passion? So those are all bigger discussions, but you need to develop some type of alternative for them to pursue. Involve them in this. Anytime you can pull your students in to help you design things and figure things out, that's good work on your part. And again, it validates them, it involves them, they have more buy-in in what's happening. Once you have this list, during that time, they're able to work on this, they're able to document what they're learning and doing in different areas. It's really important to include guidelines for how students are to work, so you don't just send them off. You know, you've compacted out of this, you have some time, go do this activity. So you need to be very specific in modeling and teaching and guiding them on how they're to work during this time. And then you also need to make sure that you are meeting with them. You don't send them off and wish them good luck. They're still valued members of the classroom. And even if it's a quick 10-minute check-in, 15-minute check-in, they need to know that what they are doing is still valued, even though they're not with the same class. I just saw one comment pop up about Susan Weinbrenner, and I want to say that I agree that those are great resources. So if you have access to those or can find them, she does a great job of laying out how to do this and how to do this well. Okay. Professional learning priorities for this section. While you are working on this, I'm going to go look at all of the comments. As we've done on the other days, three areas that you are deciding if you fit into. B is beginning, you're aware and you want to try in this area. Developing, you have tried or are trying. Leading, you're consistently aware, implementing changes, and making others aware. So you're going to think about the following statements. I use varied ways to identify students' readiness for challenge. Are you beginning? Are you developing? Are you leading? I help students feel more comfortable with additional challenge by providing supports. I find community members and role models with whom my students can personally identify. I know how to thoughtfully choose acceleration options. I provide ideas for appropriate learning activities that students can work on while I'm teaching the material they have already mastered.
So that's really good to see that there are people that are using it. It's such an effective tool.
I also love the idea of virtual mentors, and actually that's probably a safer way to start the mentorship program than sending students off with mentors. So if you are
Comments I do too. So I think that's a good segue into trying to find a focus of how to move forward. So although it's not part of the Giftedness Knows No Boundary campaign, we thought it was really important to add a 5th chapter, and we entitled it Advocate for Me. So let us remember, one book, one pen, one child, and one teacher can change the world. And that's from Malala Yousafzai. So when we're talking about advocacy, advocacy can be really big. It can be on a smaller scale. So advocacy can take many different forms. So arranging a meeting with a state legislator to share concerns that student needs are not being met in Title I schools is for sure advocacy. Talking to colleagues about a student you feel needs extra support, that's also advocacy. So we have kind of these macro levels of advocacy, and then more these micro levels of advocacy. And one is not better than the other. So determining how you can advocate. So we have some steps for this, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but we did want to share a couple of ways that you can start to do some targeted advocacy. So to advocate for your underserved, high potential learners, you need to determine your priorities for professional learning, identify opportunities to educate others about the needs of these students, and create an action plan that really is something that you can implement sooner than later. So one way to do this, and again, all of these forms are in the Padlet, is what we call the Advocacy Focus Finder. So based on the different chapters, you would take these different concepts that were the key concepts within these chapters, and then provide ratings of where you feel in terms of like personal growth, professional growth, school, district, or state needs. So you might rate, implicit bias, for example, on a scale of 1 to 5 being a low priority or high priority for you, you would put that rating in there. Where is it in terms of your professional growth? Where is it in terms of your school, state, district needs? And then for each of those 4 major sections of the book, you could tally that and then kind of see where you're leaning in terms of this might be a focus area for me of something that I can get done this year, this semester, whenever you think it's possible. So this is just one tool to help you kind of hone in on an area of advocacy. So again, advocacy, it may look like writing letters, sending emails, making phone calls to, or scheduling meetings with stakeholders at your school, within your district, at the state level. It could look like preparing and giving professional learning presentations to teachers and staff. It could look like providing indirect or direct consultation to other teachers at your school, organizing and implementing support groups for teachers or families in your district, presenting at local, state, regional, or national education conferences. These are all different types of advocacy. I'm going to let Amy, she does such good work with SMART goals, talk to you a little bit about setting a SMART goal.
So I don't know how prevalent that is there. I'm guessing because of the way we've done a little bit of research into how you set up your identification and your do you call them IEPs? Is that right? There. There's a big focus on this in Colorado, developing a SMART goal. I know when I work with students to do this initially, they don't want to. This seems like a lot of work. It seems like it's not necessarily relevant, not something that they want to spend a lot of their time on. And yet it's just a really good way, even for adults, for all of us, to be able to figure out what our focus needs to be and then document, measure what it is we're doing. So we have our teachers do this in our graduate programs at different times. So go through the same similar steps. Very specifically, what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish and why? And the why is so important. We do that with our students with our advanced learning plans too. Why? Why is this a goal? Why is this something that you're wanting to work toward? Without that why, there's typically a huge lack of motivation in accomplishing whatever goal is written down. So very specifically, what are you trying to accomplish as far as advocacy, taking into account where you are with knowledge, where you are with within your community, within your learning environment, and then why? Why is this particular advocacy step important to you? How are you going to know when you've met that goal? So it needs to be measurable. It needs to be something that's realistic. I know teachers well enough to know that most of you want to save the world. That's very difficult to measure. That's very difficult to attain. At least in a short period of time. You may get there, you may save the world eventually, but for these goals, when you're talking about advocacy, what's attainable? What can you do that you will really feel like you have accomplished something that has the possibility to make a positive impact for your underserved gifted learners? How will this goal make a positive change for your underserved gifted learners? I just mentioned that, but that's the relevant. How is this relevant to the learners with whom you're working? And then time bound, what is your time frame? You need to have a specific endpoint where you're going to check in and either say, okay, I've met it, I want to move on, this is my next goal, or I haven't met it yet, let's make some modifications and let's move forward and figure out how to be successful, how to advocate in the way that you want to for your underserved gifted learners. And then we included an example of a teacher's SMART goal around advocacy. By the end of the fall semester, I will collect information on my school's current gifted identification practices that influence underserved gifted learners and present this information along with practical recommendations and a rationale for these recommendations to my grade level team. So this teacher was really interested in finding out what is that impact? How is what we're doing either helping or potentially harming underserved gifted learners when it comes to being identified for gifted education programming, but she didn't want to go too big with it. She wanted to just have a conversation within her grade level team, which is absolutely advocacy. And it was important for her to focus on what she had control over. So we know there are bigger issues everywhere. Across the nation, we know there are issues with identifying underserved gifted learners for gifted education programming, for advanced programming in general. But with all of these, it's really important, like we talked about earlier, what do you have the capacity to impact? What can you do within your sphere of control? So it all needs to be focused there. Otherwise, it sometimes feels hopeless and helpless and much too big to even start to take steps toward trying to improve. And then breakout activity. Last one for these sessions, your last breakout activity. This one we gave you 10 minutes to complete. I'm going to ask you to think about how you have advocated for underserved high potential learners in the past, how you advocate for them presently, and how you hope to advocate for them in the future. And it can be a really short-term hope. I hope that by the time we start next quarter, I'm able to do this. I'm able to have this conversation with this person about these students. This is the teacher next door. Or it could be a bigger future. So we'll leave that up to you. And then if there are things that you want to share with members in your group, takeaways that you've had from these sessions or things that you want to make sure that you remember going forward, this is your opportunity to do that too.
And then we wanted to make sure we gave Carol time for the raffle to do the books. So our last slide, advocating is our life. I love it. Again, beginning, developing, and leading. And there's just 3 areas here we just would like you to focus on. So I make a concrete effort to talk to my building colleagues about the strengths and needs of underserved gifted learners. Are you beginning, developing, leading in that area? I try to advocate beyond my building for causes related to underserved gifted learners. And then the third one, I have identified at least one area where I want to advocate for underserved gifted learners. And it could be an area that you've already identified. It doesn't have to be based on today, but you've identified at least one area where you'd like to focus your future advocacy efforts.